Hi, my name is Brian Donnelly and I'm coming from Bia Rebel on the Ormer Road. We specialise in ramen, which is a Japanese noodle broth, and today we're going to show you how to make ramen noodles in association with virtual Mela. So let's get started and explain what ramen is. Most people don't know ramen, but if you've had a pot noodle and you've had a super noodle, you've had ramen. But I can tell you from experience, ramen is a much more diverse, broad palette of flavours than just that there. So, ramen essentially means Chinese noodle. Ra is Japanese for Chinese and men means noodle. So chow mein, anything that's got mein in it, means noodle. What makes ramen noodles different? Ramen is different from ordinary noodles in that they contain no egg. The majority of noodles you're going to associate with noodles are an egg noodle, and ramen has no egg in it. Instead, they get their colour from two different types of salt. One regular table salt and one dehydrated bicarbonate soda. So we're just going to crack onto it. What I have here is 4.5 kilos of strong plain flour. The important thing with flour is not to get bogged down in brands like 00 and things like that there. You're looking for anything that's 12.5 grams protein up to 13.5 grams protein. What you have to remember is all flour is a dead product with everything added back in. And if you're really into it, you go and get stone ground flour, which is a slow mill flour and retains a lot of the natural things that you want in the flour. So, flour, water, salt. Scraper, and most important, some chopsticks. So we use the chopsticks to make our well, start making our noodles. It keeps your hands nice and clean, but most important, it makes you look quite cool and let you know what you're doing. So mix, mix, mix. And if you look in, you'll see that the flour, the protein's starting to react. It's actually starting to look a little bit like egg yolk. If you're making this at home, you're going to be making a much smaller batch than this here. The important thing to understand is that it's about moisture level. So at Bia Rebel, we specialise in a Tokyo style ramen. So we make a 2.2 ml cut noodle that has 63% moisture hydration. But we took it a little bit further because we didn't like the bite, and we reduced that down to 47% moisture hydration. This means you end up with a noodle that's very, very bitey and has a nice snap whenever it goes into your mouth. So you can see here, this has become nice and gluey, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. What we're going to do, I'm just going to start adding the flour and chop it with our scraper. So anyone that's made pasta will recognise this. And when you're making pasta, like all noodles, you're trying to work the gluten in order to give it a certain elasticity that gives you a very, very nice mouthfeel. Now, we don't want to have the same elasticity that you're going to have whenever you're doing pasta. Okay, we want this to be very snappy, bitey, almost breaking in the mouth, whereas pasta you want it to be much, much more elastic. And so when you're making pasta, I guess this level, you start to knead it as if you're making bread. But with this here, we're just going to make it very, very light, very easy, lightness to touch. And we're really not touching it, and we're not working it very hard. So when you get to this point here, we want to start incorporating all of the flour by using a lift and separate motion. So hands underneath, and just gently bring it together. Like this, and we're looking for a texture of torn rags. Now most people at home like making ramen because it's quite fun, but the one thing they have a lot of difficulty with is the noodle, because it is quite difficult to work with, and you're going to see that whenever I start to knead the dough. So like I said before, if you're making pasta at this point, you start to knead it as if you're making bread. With ramen, we compress knead it, and that's the real main difference. So now, you've got your dough. It's very, very crumbly. And if you look closely at it, if you made pasta and you squeeze in your hand like this, it comes together like a nice ball. But with ramen noodles, whenever we crush it again, it comes apart, so it's extremely dry. And this is what makes it very difficult. In Japan, they'll use special machines and beaters, and they're very organised about it, very traditional about it. We're in Belfast, we like things to be a little bit quicker. At home you're going to want it a bit quicker, so we're going to use the mighty food processor. In this here, I'm just using plastic bread blender, and we're just going to pop this in. So. I'm going to just blitz it for anywhere up to 20 seconds. And what you have is essentially a breadcrumb texture. So all that you're really trying to do here is distribute the moisture across all of the flour. So pouring rags to breadcrumbs, and now we're going to make some sheets. So now that you've got it through the food processor, what we should have is maybe not as big a pile of crumbs as I have, but I'm making that full batch here. We make ours in small batches of about 50 portions at a time, and it takes just over 1.5 hours to make 50 portion noodles. So if we cook for 100 people, someone stewed for 3 hours to make your noodles. So the one thing that I really like about ramen is that you invest quite a lot of your heart in it, and it means that you end up with a much better product as a whole. Now the next part is making this into an actual noodle. Well, if you're at home, you're going to have a pasta machine. It might work, but it's going to be very, very difficult. As you can see, there's not a lot of moisture here. We use a mechanical machine, which we got in especially for this. It's very, very simple. And what we're going to do is we're just going to put it through the rollers. So just if you imagine like an old mangle, and that should bring the dough together. And then we keep adding it through and through. And then I'll explain that we go from the smallest setting to the largest setting. So generating stress in the beginning and then relaxing towards the end. So it's a very sort of zen-like process, and you need to certainly be in a very zen mindset when you're making it, because it can break you a little bit. So just pop a little of this in and hit the button, and you're going to see sheets then start to come out. As you can see, they're still very fragile, but we're going to bring this together. Try and keep everything flat and organised. So you don't want the gluten to be all a mishmash, you want to try and have it so straight. The idea is that we're creating layers of straight strands of gluten, so think of it like a muscle, as opposed to pasta, which you need to think of like a ball of yarn. So once we go through once, lift it, back through. And obviously if you can't do that at home, you can always come here and we can get it from us. But it's definitely worth giving it a go, because there's nothing better than fresh ramen. So you can see it's still starting to come together, but it's still extremely fragile. It's the way it's tearing. So I'm saying how we make our ramen noodles as well makes us quite unique. I think I've only come across one other guy who does ramen similar to us, and he's based in Holland. His restaurant's called Ski, and he's a Japanese guy who likes to ski. So we opened a ramen restaurant near a ski resort, so that kind of makes a lot of sense. And he uses a similar machine and sort of similar process, but again he does a very different type of noodle. Clean and tidy, clean and tidy. We're continuously folding it over. We want to make our first sheet very neat, very tidy. And you can see it starts to come out. It's starting to become more elastic, and we're just making this one ready for the rest of the crumb. So this one sheet's going to carry all of this here, and we're just going to keep popping it through until we use it all up, and then we're going to bring it to cut size. And you'll see as well as we go along, the colour of the dough changes as the water spreads throughout. So one of the reasons that you use egg and pasta is because it's got quite a high protein. particularly in the albumin and the yolk. And you'll see a lot of guys that doing full yolk pastas, so essentially you want 100% protein pasta, and it's very crumbly, and it is kind of rich in terms of texture, but it's not very good. It's not very good. I've spent a lot of time working in really high-end restaurants like Randy and Gary Rose and Michelle Rouge Jr. at the Gablois and things like that. And they make a French-style pasta, and you know, sometimes you're better just to leave good things alone and stop mucking about with them. And one of the restaurants I worked in, the pasta had 26 ingredients in it. So at 26 ingredients, you know you've gone too far. You know, it's water, flour, salt, and the fluid. Okay, so here we go. One sheet, really rough texture on it. And we were going to look at the end of this, it's going to feel like very high quality leather. And that's the texture one, very smooth. Here's the machine from a little bit of tough time. We're going to create a loop now. So now it's like a fan belt of the car. And then start adding this in. Of course we will break today. Okay, so we put the crumbs through the machine and we end up with a sheet of dough like this, but it's not ready yet because it's still quite brittle, and if you feel the texture of it, it's very coarse. So what we want to do is we're going to start the opposite of pasta. We're going to start opening up the machine, so we're quite relaxed, and we're going to end up creating multiple layers of dough one on top of the other. And if you look quite closely there, you can see that it's already starting to happen. So it's a little bit like puff pastry in that sense. So just over it goes, nice and neat. And this process is just really relaxing out the gluten. You're going to see even after one turn through the machine, the texture is changing. This only needs 3 or 4 turns through the machine. You're going to see the turning feels very smooth to the touch, and that's what you're looking for. I'm just going to put it through one more at the thickest setting. So what a lot of people ask me is that when you talk about cutting the noodles, they always refer to a noodle that you'll see them do on YouTube where they throw the noodle out and they make it like this. And this is called a life noodle. And in Asia it's very important to have very long noodles. It depicts your life and a long life and a prosperous life. But in Europe and the Western world, we don't like that long noodle because we're not very good at slurping the noodle up. So we like to have a slightly shorter noodle. The preferred length in Europe, according to all the research, is 140 millimeters, or just over 1 foot. That's what we like. And so when I'm on this thickest cut here, that'll give us the length that we're looking for. So I'm just going to portion these up. And now you can do this by hand, and I have made this by hand, but it's extremely difficult. But it is a very good workout, so if you're looking to get a 6-pack or something, try to do this by hand and compress it and knead it and cut it. and you'll soon come into the industrial age and get a machine that does it for you. So, dough done, set up. There's no need for any extra flour because it's really quite dry. And then we're going to take this, and this is our cutter. So if you're familiar with pasta and things like that, this is nothing new to you. I cut ours with a very precise square edge. You can get these cutters that you can give them like a slightly rounded edge or fully rounded edge. So just think of all the pasta shapes. That's essentially what you're doing. The reason that I like to have a square edge on it is that it has a very nice mouthfeel. And you can see that whenever you eat linguine and spaghetti. I don't particularly like spaghetti, but I really like linguine. Pop this in real quick. And then we're going to set this to our cutting depth. So most people normally have the numbers on it, so you can set it quite easy, but we don't have that. So it's 2 turns and 1 full turn. And then, all being well, there's your beautiful noodles. I'm going to do that again because there's some grease in my finger yet. So I'm just going to pop this through, and this should give us our beautiful noodles. I'm going to grab them gently, get a little bit of tension on them, and through they come. And we've got a lovely portion of fresh ramen noodles. And the great thing about this is that when your dehydrated noodles takes between 8 and 12 minutes to cook, these take between 60 seconds and 75 seconds to cook. So there's a massive difference. Okay, so that's us from Bia Rebel on the Ormer Road. I'd just like to thank the virtual Mela for coming and videoing us and making this happen. I'd like to encourage everybody to get out there and check it out. Visit all your local restaurants, the Indian restaurants, the Chinese, and not forgetting us, the Japanese restaurants as well. And there's more to life than steak and potatoes.